Hi, welcome to this series of interviews to learn more about the ICIS members. My name is Choo, and as part of the efforts of this community, we would like to know more about the research trajectories of the members. I'm very delighted to have here Dr. Marilyn Vihman. Marilyn is now Emeritus Professor of Linguistics at the University of York in the UK, where she supervised my PhD thesis. She is also a research linguist at the University of California, Berkeley. Marilyn has spent over 50 years studying infant speech perception and early vocal and phonological development, as well as how bilingual children learn languages and what individual phonological templates or patterns may be identified in early child speech. So we have a lot to learn from her. Marilyn, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we would like to learn more about you. What kind of work are you doing right now?
Well, I'm doing a little linguistics work. I'm officially retired, but I like to keep my hand in. So the past year, I've written a couple of book chapters, one on code switching and bilingual children, and the other one on Estonian phonological development, which I had not really written about before, with a couple of students in Estonia. But I'm spending more of my time, I have spent more of my time writing a history of my family, which goes back to the 19th century in Alsace in France and in Mexico, and then finally in California. Lots of family letters and documents, and so I've been doing a lot of writing, which is what I enjoy the most.
This sounds very interesting, like family histories of not child language development at all.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's not directly related to my research at all, but of course, both the skill in doing research and the practice of doing a lot of writing, those both contribute to what I'm doing now. So it's not like it's been a waste of time all these years.
Yeah. Okay, so what would you consider your most exciting research discoveries?
Okay, well, I think there are two things that I think about as my main contributions to the field. And the first I would really call a discovery, and that came in the mid 1980s when Charles Ferguson, whom I had worked with for many years, it was a kind of a postdoc, but it was more of just, I was his assistant on on several research grants, and I was running the child phonology project at Stanford. So I did that for, I don't know, many years, over 10 years. And he and Carol Farwell wrote a paper in 1975 that was very well received and has been cited many, many times, where they showed that infants' first words were accurate in the sense that they didn't make a lot of mistakes. They didn't distort the adult word, but also that the adult words they were trying to say were very simple. So it's like the children were picking the right words to say because they could say them. Um, and so people were saying, oh, that means they know what they shouldn't try to say because they know everything they don't know. And that's why they're able to. And I thought, no, that can't be right. It didn't make sense to me. So as I thought about it over a period of a few years, I started thinking, well, it must be that they pick up on words that match the babble patterns that they already have. Um, and so that means that their hearing as particularly salient, particularly memorable, anything in the adult language that is like what they hear themselves saying, because you hear yourself speaking, of course. And so a baby who's been saying ba, 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 who's been using B syllables, she hears baby, maybe also bottle and book and bye bye as similar to baba or ba. And so then when the right situation arises and she sees the mom arriving with a bottle, let's say, she might say ba because she's been hearing it, she can say it, it just pops out of her mouth. And that is an early word. And so that's where I think the words come from. So that was my idea in the mid 80s. And there were some people who were interested in that, people who are interested in the question of the motor theory of speech perception, which this is not endorsing that theory, which is very controversial, but it is suggesting something about it, that maybe we hear things in terms of the way that we say them ourselves. And so, as it happened, um, Michael Studdert Kennedy and Peter McNeilage and Bjorn Lindblom came to Stanford in 1986-87 to do research together at what we used to call the think tank. I forget what the official name is. And I talked to them, and Michael Studdert Kennedy especially was very interested in my idea and very encouraging. So that felt really good. And I was invited to a conference at Haskins. I wrote a chapter for the conference that was in honor of the retirement of the head of Haskins at that time. I've forgotten his first name now. So I went on talking about this, and I talked to Bjorn Lindblom about it quite a bit. He was kind of skeptical, and he said, well, if children are producing the words that they're able to say, how do they ever make any progress? How do they move on from that? So that led me to kind of develop my ideas a bit. But what was really needed was some empirical evidence. So it was over 10 years before I started working with Rory DePaulis, who was able to run some experiments testing my idea. And the way we tested them was to check whether babies would listen more to a sound pattern that they were producing, or a sound pattern that babies their age sometimes produce, but that they were not producing. So there was an attraction to what they could say themselves. So that was in the early 2000s, I guess. We finally ran the experiments on that. And the answer was interesting too. And it turned out that babies who had a single sound pattern that they could do well, that they did a lot frequently in a home recording, they would listen more to that pattern. So we made up words that had either B's and P's in them, or they had T's and D's, or they had KG, any one of those three. And they would play any two of them, a pair. And babies who had more than one pattern. So sometimes babies start saying lots of P's and B's and also T's and K's, both around the same time or within a week. These are 10, 11-month-olds. Those who had more than one, they listened more to what they could not yet produce. So, that's how they move on. They start by focusing on what they can easily do, and then they notice that there are other sounds in the world, other sounds in the speech signal, and they start paying attention to the ones that they need to learn, that they aren't doing yet. So that has now been replicated. There are 3 studies based on that idea, and it's very well accepted now. So that is my number one finding, that I had this idea and I continue to pursue it, and more examples arise. I mean, it does seem as though babies, for example, learning a language with pitch, an African language, high pitches are learned earlier than low pitches, or falling and rising pitches, partly, I think, because babies are high pitched, their voice is high pitched. And babies learn words with long medial consonants sooner than words that have short consonants, which you might think was easier, but babies produce very slowly. And so they're attracted to the sound patterns that they can easily produce. And I've looked now at about 5 different languages: Italian, Finnish. There's some evidence from Hindi, which I haven't looked at myself. And it turns out that they always produce more words with long consonants, medial consonants, than the mother does, than is in the caretaker speech. They go beyond that. They choose to say lots of target words that have long medial consonants. And I think it's because of the match to what they're able to easily produce themselves. Arabic, I didn't mention, yeah. So quite a few languages. The languages that have geminates, or long medial consonants in the world, are in the minority, but it's a very large minority. There are a lot of languages like that. And this pattern is really stable. So that was discovering number 1. You want to hear another one?
Yes, go on. I'm like, oh, this sounds very familiar,
Yes.
very close to my heart. Yes.
You spent a lot of time with me, so you know. The other is not, I wouldn't call it a discovery because other people were talking about. So, and Natalie Watterson in 1971, I think it was the first paper I ever read in phonological development. So, the 71 paper, I must have read it in the late 70s when I was working with Ferguson already. And she found that her 18-month-old was producing a lot of producing words with a small number of patterns that were very different from the adult pattern, but they picked up elements of the adult pattern. The example that's cited the most is something like nye nye nya nya, for words like window, randall, and other words that had a nasal in there somewhere. And the baby was just producing two syllables with a repeated nasal onset. And of course, nga isn't even a possible English word. But the baby was hearing these nasal sounds and making a pattern out of them. And that baby had several others. Actually, my son, Rivo, whom I've also written several papers about, he also had a set of small patterns that he used for a lot of his words. This is no longer 10, 11-month-olds. This is now 16, 18-month-olds, babies who have quite a few words. They settle into a pattern that they can easily do and produce select a lot of words with that pattern, and then they go on to the next step, which is trying to say adult words that are more complex than that they can't actually produce, and assimilating them to the pattern that they can do. And so that is what we call phonological templates. I know you've worked on that as well in Mandarin. So in all the languages I've looked at, any of the babies we've looked at, they produce different templates. Each baby has his own kind of take on what the adult language can be turned into within his own capacity, his production capacity. And so the patterns are really fascinating to me. That's what I enjoy studying the most. So I didn't discover templates, but I'm probably the person who has pursued it the most. And I've looked at a lot of different languages. Sometimes the pattern isn't very striking, and it may be as simple as just a CV syllable. One French child whose data were collected by, I think, Edie Veneziano, she had loads of words that were reduced to a single CV syllable, but you could see that she was applying that to a lot of words that weren't like that in the adult language. It gives them kind of a solid starting point. It's wrong, it's inaccurate, it's maybe less accurate than what they were doing earlier when they were just selecting words they could do, but it gives them a kind of a database from which to move on. And we now know from work in AI how important the database is. You can draw on whatever you know, whatever is in your database, and then build structures. And so that
It's still very fascinating. Yes, I owe you the paper. I will get to it. Okay, what motivated you to start doing infant research? What is your passion for infant research? Is it
well,
template?
I did a PhD in straight phonology, and while I was working on it, it took me a long time to get my PhD. I wasn't hurrying. I was kind of dilettantish. I was studying other things at the same time. And when I finally finished my PhD, linguistics had become very formal, more kind of mathematics driven than motorically or phonetics driven. And I had gotten interested in what languages sound like coming out of the mouth of a baby. I think mainly because my linguistics classes, my first linguistics classes, which I took as a graduate student, I didn't do linguistics as an undergrad. I didn't know there was such a thing as linguistics when I was an undergrad studying Russian. In my linguistics classes, they always emphasized the fact that there are no primitive languages. All languages are equally complex. It's a question of looking at their structures, and they're complex. They're more complex in different areas of the grammar. Like some people think English is kind of simple, but if you look at their auxiliary system, it's very complex. As a second language learner, I think people recognize that that's very hard. So there are no primitive languages. What about babies, though? What is their language like? And so I think I was really interested in looking at babies to find out what a primitive language might look like if there was one. And of course, babies have got a limited number of articulatory resources, and they have limited understanding of what meanings there might be. And so there you have a primitive language, if you like. And that really was what started me being interested. And then the second thing that kind of comes out of that is if you don't already know what a language is, of course, Chomsky's theory is that babies know everything already, and they just have to listen. The input, it gets filtered through the dark box, black box, or whatever, and it comes out in, yeah. So that's Chomsky's view, which is not based on research into children at all. It's simply based on sophisticated research into what the adults do. But if children don't start with innate knowledge, which I don't believe at all, if they start just with the brain structures that serve every other aspect of knowledge, then how do they ever come up with a system? Where does system come from? Where does the sort of motivation or the drive to develop a system come from? Where's the knowledge come from? So that's where my interest in templates also is grounded, is that templates to me represent the systematization of phonological knowledge. And actually, Catherine Lang, who is teaching the courses that I used to teach at York now, she was my PhD student before you, she has started using a modeling system, a network modeling system that allows you to talk about how similar patterns are or are not, how words are related or not related in a network. And we're going to be writing a chapter together on actually, we're going to focus on some new data from, or data that I've worked on before, but now applying the network model to languages with geminates in particular. They're not identical across the different languages. The structure makes a difference, but all of the babies tend to develop templates around geminates we've found in those languages. And so we're going to look at that and see what the network model can tell us about how the system emerges over time. So I'm still able to do some work on that, which is really fun for me.
Yeah, geminate consonants are fascinating. They are very cute and fun. I don't speak a language with a geminate consonant, but it always like it catches my attention, not just the babies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any advice for students interested in this field?
Well, I think anyone interested in studying child language should do something that I didn't do, and that is take courses in psychology as well as linguistics. I've had to learn my psychology on the job. For 11 years, I was a professor of developmental psychology at University of Bangor, of Wales and Bangor in the UK. And I learned a lot of psychology by being surrounded by colleagues doing brilliant work. So I learned a lot on the job. But when I was in college, you could take psychology, but it didn't count towards your science requirement. So you had to take something, to me, difficult and boring, like physics or chemistry or geology, which I ended up taking geology, which I hated. But psychology started with the anatomy of the eye. And since my interest in psychology was about, at that time, I was interested in Freud and Jung and that kind of psychology, I didn't want to do the anatomy of the eye. And since it didn't even count as science, I didn't take it. And I regret that. So I've always been lucky in having colleagues like Tamar Karen Portnoy, who came to work with me in 2003, and other colleagues, Rory DePaulis, who have taught me or who have run experiments working with me with some of the ideas I was interested in exploring. I couldn't do it on my own. I never learned experimental design, and I never learned statistics. Of course, statistics has totally turned over since my day. Now people use R, and it's a completely different kind of statistics. Anyway, so I didn't learn those things, and I think it would be a good idea to study psychology and linguistics. You really need both.
I would agree, coming from both fields myself.
Yes, you did the right thing. You studied.
Yeah. So we would also like to ask, what do you like to do when you are not doing science?
Well, okay, so I guess there's three things. So I like to cook, luckily, because I live alone. I cook for myself. I don't do takeout. I cook. I try to cook something that's going to last 2 or 3 days so I don't have to cook every day, but I enjoy cooking. I like making soup. I like trying out new recipes. Nowadays, you can get new recipes from the internet all the time. So when I see one, New York Times gives me a selection of recipes. I pick one that sounds interesting and I try it out. And of course, if it's not so good, it's only me eating it anyway, usually. So if it's good, I keep the recipe. So that's one. And I do a lot of hiking. The hiking in Britain was wonderful. I learned to become a serious hiker when I was living in Bangor. There wasn't a whole lot to do there other than hiking, but the hiking was fabulous. And so I was in my 50s then. I never really hiked before that. And here I don't do mountain climbing anymore, although I went to Japan and climbed the Kumano Kodo in April this year. And that was very tough. I think I was aiming a little too high there, but we did it anyway with a group. So I like to hike and I like to walk. I don't have a car, so I walk everywhere. Where I live in Berkeley, it's kind of like York. It's a relatively small town, and you can walk most places. And there's enough of a bus system, which is unusual in the US, enough of a bus system to allow me to get everywhere. And luckily, there's the Bay Area Rapid Transit. So with that, I can go to San Francisco, go to a museum, have lunch with a friend. Yeah, so I get around. I said there were three things. The third thing is I love to write. And of course, that was a big part of my academic life was writing. But now, in the last 5 years since I retired and came to Berkeley, I've been putting together the letters and photographs that I inherited from my family, digitizing everything, translating the letters, which are almost all in French because my family was French. And I've spent the 5 years writing a book about the origins of my family, including, I just wrote the last piece, which is 3 pages on the origins of Alsatian Jews, going all the way back to the destruction of the temple in the year 70 AD. And I've learned so much. I read a book about this and a few other things, mainly this one book, and putting it together into a 3 page summary, I learned a lot. It was extremely interesting. So yeah, I'm keeping busy, enjoying myself.
Yes, very busy, it seems like. Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the ICIS community?
I don't think so. I think the world has turned over several times since I started doing linguistics. And I mean, everything has changed so completely. I mean, I used to write papers by hand and type them up and, have to use whiteout to correct mistakes. So everything has changed so much. And I feel very lucky because now you can tune into meetings on Zoom. You can talk to people anywhere in the world on Zoom. You can communicate by email, communication. Everything has ratcheted up that much. And of course, we have to worry a little bit about whether AI gets to be smarter than we are. I don't really think that's going to happen. I don't think the creativity is going to be there, but it's interesting. So we're watching this space, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds great. Thank you very much for taking the time for this short interview. It has been a pleasure to have you here and sharing your knowledge. Have a good day and take care.
Thank you.